All right, great to have you here with us. As Americans celebrate July 4th, and we wish them, of course, a happy 4th of July, we look to our neighbors to celebrate both our similarities and our differences, some things we do have in common, but when it comes to our political system, it's not anything that we share in common. JJ McCullough been writing about this. He joins us now in Vancouver to explain why maybe we should. Hello.
Hello.
This is a great topic that you wrote about because you suggest their system is far more superior than what we have here, and there are far more checks and balances.
Yeah, well, I mean, they certainly have a much more democratic system, and I think that's the fundamental difference, is that while Canada has a very sort of top-down, rather quite authoritarian political system, we've seen, particularly in some recent sort of episodes in the United States, just the strength of sort of like the populist democracy and the checks and balances on sort of executive power, whether it be in some of these recent primary battles or whether it be in some of the recent clawbacks of President Obama's attempt to sort of rule by fiat. So when you look at American politics increasingly, you do see a window into a very foreign political culture in some respects, but it's foreign not in sense of any sort of cultural values, but it is just foreign in the extent to which Americans take democracy a lot more seriously than Canadians do, and Americans tend to trust individual voters a lot more than the party sort of establishment in this country is willing to trust voters.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you need only drive down to the United States, you drive through any state, and you'll constantly see election signs up because they vote in everyone, from judges to school trustees. Every part of their system is elected, which I think is fantastic. It's a little more work for the electorate, but you get far more balance because people actually have to be held to account.
Yes, and that's very much what we've seen in these primary elections that have been happening across the states recently. I mean, this is something that is quite remarkable from a Canadian perspective, and it's worth sort of noting explicitly. In America, you get to vote in a primary, you get to vote in a Republican or a Democrat nomination race simply by self-identifying as a Republican or a Democrat. So if I just go to the polling station and say, I'm a Democrat, let me vote for the Democrat nominee. I'm a Republican, let me vote for the Republican nominee. You get to do that. In America, there's none of this rigmarole of, having to fill out cards and pay fees for the privilege of belonging to a political party. In America, political parties are sort of considered like sort of public utilities that everyone has a right to participate in as as just a basic right of democratic citizenship. So what you've seen in turn is that sort of party officials, such as former House Leader Eric Cantor, they're ultimately responsible to their own electorate, not to just a very tiny clique of sort of party members who in this country are usually like relatives and staffers of the politician's campaign staff. No, a politician like Eric Cantor is ultimately responsible to all sort of self-identified Republican voters in his own district, and if he runs afoul of them, no matter if he is, House Leader of the party in Congress, he can still go down to defeat. That's something that you would just never see in Canada because there isn't that kind of checks and balances. I mean, if Eric Cantor was sort of the equivalent in Canada, a party leader like Justin Trudeau would probably just declare him, a protected candidate. There shall be no nomination election. This guy is great, so he's just going to be installed.
Yeah, I mean, Eric Cantor got served in such a monumentally big way. He had huge name recognition, he had huge money behind him, and he simply took that all for granted and was beaten by a complete unknown Tea Partier. And so I think it serves everyone in probably that in Washington well to wake up and make sure you are actually serving the people, because what Eric Cantor didn't do was remember he works for somebody, and so they said bye-bye. And so you point out Justin Trudeau, and Justin Trudeau took the step while, in his platform when he was speaking at the leadership convention, that he would do something that no other leader did, which was to have open nominations. And then he went back on that, which was, I think, a big mistake because he was, I think, doing something that could have been very good for the electorate, and as we've seen, it fell apart.
Yeah, well, I mean, he went back in sort of two quite demonstrable ways. I mean, he went back by just explicitly installing people. Adam Vaughan, Chrystia Freeland just sort of said, like, these people will be your candidates. They're, I've given them my kiss of approval. They're in, regardless of what sort of the local party constituency have to say. So, I mean, that was one betrayal. And then also, of course, he has his sort of abortion edict in which he sort of says, anyone who doesn't sort of toe my line on abortion is not going to be sort of given the nomination, is not welcome in my party. And this is because in Canada, it's also worth remembering that we have a very very hierarchical system that they just don't have in the States. Like, there is no boss of the Republican Party, there is no boss of the Democrat Party. There is bosses of all of these parties in Canada, and the bosses have tremendous power. I mean, so to the extent that which Justin Trudeau can say we'll have open nominations or whatever, I mean, these are sort of promises that only exist at the pleasure of the leader, and if the leader decides he wants to go back on his promise, that's his right to do so, because his powers are so sweeping. And there's nothing equivalent to that in the States, because in the States, as I said, you know, party membership is a basic right of democratic citizenship. And you know, what the Republican Party is or believes or whatever is decided in, you know, hundreds of individual ridings across the country. It's not decided by one guy at the top who decrees what, you know, Republicans do or don't believe. And so when you have something that's quite remarkable like the Tea Party, it shows that there is a kind of internal struggle for what the Republican Party should be all about. You never get that in Canada because whoever is the party leader just declares, you know, definitively what the party is all about.
Yeah,
and I mean, as a result, you have whips as well, right? I mean, you have this, I just have to say this because this is a statistic that I just find so remarkable, is the most disloyal member of parliament in Canada, according to a survey by the Globe and Mail, still votes with his party 99% of the time. That is incredible, right? When you consider someone like John McCain, who's made a career as a very successful Republican by routinely voting against the wishes of his party.
Yeah, it's interesting, and and as much as people say Stephen Harper is draconian, it's no different if Justin Trudeau says you have to vote this way with the party and not your conscience, then he's really no different.
No, absolutely. I mean, all the party leaders are guilty of this. Sure. I mean, and it's just a structural flaw in our system that we have. I mean, it comes to a lot of different regards. I mean, some of it is problems with the parliamentary system in general, which has this sort of preposterous notion of confidence voting. You know, like if the ruling party can't win a vote in Parliament, oh well, then that's this cataclysmic thing, and you have to have an emergency election, and the government falls, and blah blah blah. Whereas in a more healthy democratic system, you know, in America, if the majority party loses a vote, well then whatever, you just go on to the next vote. I mean,
but we can't even get reform at the Senate level as far as, I mean, I think at least get people elected to it and give Canadians a say in it. They can't even get that. So the notion that you put across as this is a better system, it's never going to happen in this country. I'd love to see judges elected. I'd love to see that kind of process. I think it's healthy.
Yeah, no, I agree as well, and I mean it's troublesome because I mean this is just the nature of our constitution, and we have a constitutional monarchy system, which is in some respects is very aptly titled because it holds up this kind of monarchical principle that, you know, it should be powerful men at the top of the system that have executive control over basically all other aspects of the system, and that's not the case in America, where they have a democratic republic which is based around the concept of the people rule, and it's very troubling. I mean, I think though that there are reforms that could be made if, for instance, we really substantially reformed the party system, you know, but that would take sort of a more sort of inspiring, more principled party leader than we've ever seen at any level of government. Because what happens, as we've seen with Justin Trudeau, is they all talk a good game when they want to be elected party leader, but then when they get in charge, you know, they suddenly realize the immense power that they have at their disposal, and the temptation to just sort of mold the political system, to mold the political party in order to consolidate their own power is just a temptation that's too strong to resist. It is
But you'll recall Stephen Harper, way back in the day, you know, he said Senate reform was going to happen, and you've seen, you know, the turmoil that this whole issue has caused, and I think this is one thing that probably a lot of Canadians would say, yeah, bring it on. I think that's something that'll appeal to a lot of people, but once in power, he hasn't done it. This is the time he could do it, and he can't do it.
No, and I mean, I'm still waiting to hear a good explanation for why we can't just have a national referendum on the Senate. I mean, this is something you read about in the editorial columns. No, you read about this again and again and again, and I think it just kind of comes from, we have a political culture in which the political class just, on some fundamental level, doesn't really trust the Canadian people, and more importantly, does not want to set the precedent of getting them involved in decisions that matter.
Okay, so where are we going to see the reforms in? You suggest that we could do small reforms. What reforms would you like to see come into play, and who could do this?
Well, I think that it would be nice to see, for instance, if we pass legislation that turn political parties into public utilities, in which sort of you can self-identify as a party member and then you get to register to vote in that, in which would be to transfer sort of the leadership elections and whatnot from these very closed-door things to something administered by Elections Canada, you know? Mm-hmm. So rather than having them in these, you know, convention halls where you have to sort of go and fill out your little card and have your little lanyard and all the rest of it, if this was an actual election, just like an election for anything else, like if we had a general cross cross-country election for who should be boss of the NDP, who should be boss of the Liberal Party, who should be boss of the Conservative Party. I think that would, and in turn have these kind of Elections Canada administered elections to decide who should be the Conservative Party nominee for, Coquitlam, who should be the Conservative nominee for Calgary, this kind of thing. If you broaden that,
you could do it at the municipal level with school trustees or the provincial level. Any of these smaller things you could do it too.
Yeah, it's not impossible. It just takes a bit of creative thinking and a bit of willingness to reform the system. But also, it takes a party leader who's willing to sacrifice a bit of this power.
Yeah.
A politician who's willing to sort of sacrifice to say, like, no, the political system is not always going to be controlled by me. We're going to introduce a bit of unpredictability. We're going to have politicians that have an independent power base that's independent of the power base of the party establishments in Ottawa and are going to vote in unpredictable ways because they're ultimately going to be accountable to the voters.
Well,
these are ideas you just don't hear discussed, in part, I think, because there's a stigma of anything that seems too American style.
Well, JJ, you know who could do it? You could do it, JJ. My money's on you. The Honorable JJ McCullough. That's what I'll call you.
Yes, my grim rise to power begins today.
Hey, I'd be all about it. I'll be your campaign manager. Nonetheless, JJ, I got to leave it there. Thank you, sir.